Support for Iowa Catholic Radio and the Uncommon Good provided by Mercy College of Health Sciences. Learn more at mchs.edu.
Welcome, folks, to the Uncommon Good with Bo Bonner and Dr. Bud Marr. Every week, diving deep into the truth of Catholic social teaching and restoring all things in Christ.
The Uncommon Good is on the air. I'm Bo Bonner.
And I'm Dr. Bud Marr.
We're coming to you from these United States of America, here in the middle of the country, good old Iowa, where, Bud, will there be snow forever? Do you want to make a prediction?
This might be the longest time with snow cover that we've had in years.
Am I saying this right? Were we below zero 5 days in a row?
That might be right. I remember.
I know that's a few days ago now.
Yeah, I know. It's foggy in my brain. You know, being indoors as much as we have to be right now, it sort of messes with your sense of reality. But I know Monday was horrible.
Both Mondays, right? Like 2 Mondays in a row have been horrible, right?
I almost burned our house down. We, you know, the fire starters that you get for the fireplace? We ran out of those last weekend, and so my bright idea is I would take the chimney starter that we use for the charcoal grill and just get some stuff going out there. But it was sort of one of those deals where it's like it was bitterly cold, so you're having tons of problems getting it started. But then when everything kicked into gear, I'm walking through the house with a one of those charcoal grill like chimney starters, and sparks are flying over the place. Rachel, who is very adept at life, was wondering what I was doing.
You were doing experiments?
I was just trying to get a fireplace started.
Yeah, I mean, what else are you supposed to do? I'm sure there's actually a lot of stuff you're supposed to do, but my question is, did the fireplace start?
We had a raging fire at 5 p.m. My first idea was to put use newspaper underneath the logs to get it started, but Rachel says that's a bad idea. I mean,
we've done that for cooking hamburgers, but I mean, you're not cooking anything. You're trying to keep everything uncooked but warm.
Apparently, and I think we've got some sort of like grill type setup on the top of our chimney, not to cook, but to keep the squirrels and things from going down the chimney.
Right.
And so they say like don't use too much. I was thinking the movies where you've got this letter that you don't want anyone else to see, so you burn it in the fireplace. But don't do that at home.
I love the idea that you're like, well, in the movie, and just extrapolate that. Like, do we have 100 letters? You're just like, you've been saving up for this moment.
I've noticed it's dangerous to extrapolate from movies and be like, well, they do it in films, ergo.
That's right.
This works in real life.
Extrapolate from movies plus fire equals usually a bad move. Tom
Cruise jumped off the helicopter onto a moving train.
Okay, well... This is the Uncommon Good. I don't even know if we got to that part yet. I'm Bo Bonner. I'm the Senior Advisor for Mission Initiatives and the Director for the Center for Human Flourishing over at Mercy College. Bud, you first of all, you are not responsible at Mercy College for running the fireplaces, but what are you deemed responsible for at Mercy College?
I am an academic dean, and I guess based on what I just shared, it is maybe scary that I oversee the science courses. I don't teach the science courses.
That's right, especially or anything that has to do with fire safety. Oh man! Now look, if I won't even go down that route about talking about fire safety. The point being is, we want to thank Mercy College for underwriting our show. I hope they still want to. mchs.edu. But if you have, I'll go this route, Bud. If you have a fire in your heart for healing people, mchs.edu and all the myriad ways that you can extend the healing ministry of Jesus Christ, just like the Sisters of Mercy have been doing ever since their foundress, Catherine McCauley, started that way back in Dublin. We've been carrying that spirit forward.
My mind was going to the important folks who do that sort of work with the cold weather, because I was thinking so again, I'm trying to remember the exact timeline. Whenever it snowed a lot, and it was that 24-hour period where you were sort of just like stuck at home. I was thinking of our first responders and those who have to be on the front lines on the hospital floors, and they don't get a break. So I think we're doing amazing work at Mercy College. I'm blessed to be a part of it.
mchs.edu. Bud, we took most of the first part talking about fire safety or lack thereof. I think our show will be just as intriguing as your attempts to start the fireplace. So people should stick around. This is the Uncommon Good. Bo Bonner, Dr. Bud Marr. Stick around. We'll be back right after this. back with the Uncommon Good. Bo Bonner and Dr. Bud Marr joining you this week. Thank you for listening to the show. We are so glad to have you with us, whether you're listening over the airwaves through our myriad radio stations that you might be tuned into, if you're listening on iowacatholicradio.com, the Iowa Catholic Radio app, or, of course, our good podcast listeners. We love you guys. Thank you for listening to the show. Bud, I think if people have listened to our show, there's one thing, I'm not going to say it's your favorite thing to do, but you do it often, which is you love surprising me with questions.
Oh, yeah.
And seeing how I'll react.
It's true.
So I was, if it's okay with you, planning a show where I'm going to basically ask you questions the entire time. What I'm doing is I have this theory that I think is a sort of summation of some of the things we've been talking about and is a response to an email I got. And I want to hear your response. I'm going to ask you if you think this makes sense to you. Are you cool with doing this new experimental show?
What if I said no right now? What would happen? No, I'm fine with it.
We would be deleting the button and, talking about something
Eject.
Okay, so I got a very practical email. It was really nice to have. I won't name the person. They didn't release my permission to do so. But it was great because they go, hey, we've seen you do various things. I think it might have been the Coming Home Network. They said they listened to the podcast. And I want to say thank you for the listener who listens and, of course, reaches out. But they were asking about what are practical ways if you wanted to get something started where, I think they maybe have heard us talk at the Man Up group or something like this, but they were asking for men, how do a group of men get together, fellow Catholics, to hold each other accountable and inspire each other? Presumably this could be for anyone else. So my first question I have is practical, and then it will connect back to the last show. So just stay in here with me, bud. So why I said first was before you get people together to have like a reading group, a discussion group, or even an accountability group, I said the first thing you should do is start praying together. So my first question, bud, is did I answer them? So far, I go more into depth. Yeah. But so far, did I answer them correctly to your mind?
I think that's good. I feel like our society today makes gathering in that way difficult. The first question that you have to ask, and I think this is, even the practical of the practical is, what sort of geographic region are we talking about? You need men who they're in proximity to one another. I like the idea of starting with prayer, and I think prayer opens up the right kinds of conversations. The one thing that gives me pause, and I should say I'm not as quick on my feet as you are, is I know I've been a part of these groups where the bar was almost set too high. So, for example, in St. Louis, we tried to start a reading group, and we started with we're gonna hit the classics or whatever, and it eventually, you could say, devolved into a movie watching group. But part of it was just like we were all young dads, and reading a book like that each month became cumbersome. It's also one of the great names for a men's group that I've been a part of, Cinnamon, off of cinema. But the movie watching turned out to work a lot better because you could just show up and we'd watch the film and then discuss it afterwards.
But this is perfect because it's like you knew what I was going to talk about. But folks, I have not told Bud anything I'm bringing up today. So this is what I immediately said. It might be too hard for you to get a group of men together to pray at a regular time and place.
Yeah.
So this is what I suggested. I said, even if it's through email and none of you are around, create an email group where you write to each other about prayer needs and then just commit. Like every day at 8 a.m., we will lift up each other's prayer intentions together. Or we'll just say one Hail Mary. Whatever it is, the point that I started with is to ground something in prayer, even if it's just the bare minimum, will start off on the right track. Do you think that answers?
I mean, I think this relates to one of your hobby horses, and that's we can poo-poo digital or advanced technologies too much. So you've shared on the show, I know, some of the friendships that you've built in online spaces. And I think we have to be careful. So, for instance, like you and I are part of a text chain that's...
None of you will be allowed to ever read.
But I would argue it's our closest group of friends. And so there's a tension there because on the one hand, so if in the evenings, if I'm at home and I'm only talking on the thread the entire evening, distracted from my family, that's not good. But that space has also been the space for a lot of really important conversations and prayer requests. So I like that idea because I feel like the initial commitment is going to be difficult or challenging for a lot of guys to make. And so you say to each other, let's work in this space. But then, as you pointed out, adding that commitment where every morning I'm at least going to work through the prayer requests that have been posted on the thread.
And to the sort of history that I drew from, when you were in Pittsburgh, so this text chain actually predates you going to Pittsburgh and coming back. And I'm not acting like if you weren't on the text chain, we wouldn't have kept up with you, nor am I acting like you felt like we were in the room with you. But certainly it was the case that you were a part of that group in a way and stayed that part of a group in a way that wouldn't have happened without, like you said, the ability to do something like a text chain.
I knew what was going on in Des Moines in a way that I wouldn't have otherwise known. I don't want to overstate it, but when you were talking about that, it brought to mind a line from, what's the novel? Crud.
There's a few novels out there, bud.
I know. Who was the cranky? Evelyn Waugh. His great book is
Brideshead Revisited.
Brideshead Revisited. And he describes grace as this like thin thread that God could tug on at any point in a person's life. The text chain was that thread for me.
The thin thread of grace. That's what we should rename it now. Okay. What I'll say is, so great. This is all backing up. I feel vindicated, bud, the first part of my email. What I continued to say is, look, people who pray together, especially if the point is prayer itself, and here I was just channeling John Henry Newman.
Yeah.
If you make prayer a tool to get somewhere else, like, we'll start with prayer, but the whole point is just to basically get where I want to have these discussions or something like this. I said it will fail because it will just be one other tool that humanity will misuse. But if you will devote yourself to praying for its own sake, you will be amazed about, and you said the word, where grace will drop in. I think, bud, and you tell me again, this is why I wrote this email and I want to hear from you. I wonder if sometimes because we don't, when we're trying to do something right for the church, for the faith, we want to, it's January, people have New Year's resolutions. We kind of get big plans and then they become our plans and then it becomes something I do. And we don't do a very good job of letting grace show up and show us where we need to go. Obviously, I hope people hear this if they listen to the show enough. I'm inspired by, I really was profoundly moved by thinking on air with you about the three wise men, which we'll get to in a little bit. But I think that that's what we need to start when people ask us for advice, people who like are on radio shows or priests or things like this. I think we need to start saying, hey, you can have the best ideas in the world, and I hope you get your discussion group. I hope you get a group of men who care about each other and hold each other accountable. But what you really need to do is start talking to God, asking for his direction of will and providence, and acting in a serious way like you think grace can show up.
Yeah, that's really good. I'll preface this next comment by saying we probably come off sometimes on air as contrarians. And I'll be honest, I've got a contrarian streak, but
not me.
I say this next thing not because I'm just trying to be grumpy or difficult. I think a lot of these initiatives that you see out there do have an important direction that they're trying to take. But I think of something like Exodus 90, which
wait. Something that rhymes with Exodus 90.
Okay. TM. Dexodus fine tea. But
I laughed so hard on that I coughed. Sorry, keep going.
So for those who maybe haven't heard this before, it's this movement where it's trying to, I think it's really only among men or mainly among men, where it really kind of, to me, it has a Lenten quality to it, where for 90 days you unplug, you take cold showers, there's all sorts of like disciplines that you set into your life. And of course, that kind of asceticism, you could call it, is a great thing. And I know it's really brought about some breakthroughs for a lot of Catholic guys. But I do feel like when you're saying prayer as an end in itself, where the focus is on prayer without any sort of outcome, there's all sorts of like these sort of like spiritual practices or sort of spiritual movements where sometimes it feels like a different sort of end sneaks into things. So to make it kind of personal, like for myself, I've been trying to exercise a little bit more, diet a little better. And as part of that, I've been doing meditation, just like setting aside times where I'm quiet in the presence of God. And right now, with that sort of like thing that I've taken on, it really has been, I mainly want to get my blood pressure down.
Right.
And so that, I mean, I feel like that's a good thing, but there are like Christian apps or Christian movements that take on that sort of form where it's like, download the app, you'll be more at peace, where really in the spiritual life, we're ultimately seeking union with God. And there's a way in which like prayer, there's nothing practical about it per se. It's a good in and of itself.
But this is all proof that I knew you and I would be on I had utter confidence doing the show this way because you were leading to the next 2 points. You completely alley-ooped them. One, we gamify everything now.
Yeah.
And if you gamify things, you flatten it and you make it instrumental. And so let's talk about what Bud, your vulnerability. You confess. You do have an instrumental reason for eating, and that's fine because you want your heart to be healthier so you're around for your family. But you don't need to spiritualize that.
Yeah.
Like, that's just something you should do, right? You take care of your body, you have responsibility to your children. The problem starts to be, like you said, when we instrumentalize. I mean, let's take. I mean, and you're right. I think Exodus 90 is sort of. I mean, I don't want to poo-poo on it too much because clearly what they're saying is like, well, you know what people will actually devote part of their life to is exercise regimes. Yeah. That's what they're doing, and they're like, well, hey, why not just do that and bring it over in the spiritual life? Which, okay, I can sort of understand. Same thing when you go, hey, you know what people will like devote their life to is gamified apps, like the language ones, for instance. And I have a whole thing about whether those work or not, but that's a whole other issue. But so people go, oh, well, why don't we take what the world's doing and just go like, hey, do the same thing with your faith? But that's exactly the problem in some ways. What I want people to do is, if I told you that prayer raised your blood pressure and would kill you early, I want to argue you should still pray. Now, it doesn't. And it's like you said, there's study after study that shows that people attend to their spiritual health, meditate, pray, have belief in something bigger than themselves. All of those things usually lead to better health outcomes, except, of course, when you get martyred, for instance. But that's exactly my point about bringing up martyrdom. Yeah. If, however, we lived in a society where to pray meant you would likely get killed, Bud, I want to argue, still completely worth it.
Yeah.
And if we allow our faith to be sort of gamified and flattened, that's exactly, I mean, it's just going to be sort of what happens with exercise fads, Bud? What happens with diet fads?
Yeah, they go away.
They go away.
Change. Yeah.
And so that to me was why I'm like, hey, even if you're, I was writing to this listener, and again, like blessed that they wrote in, I go, look, and even if no one responds, you've now prayed at a certain time every day with God. The second is what you said about silence. And that's the other thing is like, hey, when you start like trying to get people to go do stuff like, hey, let's read more books. I mean, you hit this with the cinnamon dudes. Let's read books. Let's get really intellectual. Let's like really like hold each other accountable. That sounds like a lot of work. And people actually out of the goodness of their heart go, well, I'm not going to be committed enough for that. But in our world, if you can go like, let's just go be somewhere and be silent for like 10 minutes, catch up with each other and then go. I told the listener that I thought that was the real next step. Start with this email chain, start with silence by yourself, but in some sort of communion with other people. And then maybe move to being silent with people and then catching up before you even ever get to book club or discussion club or something like that.
Well, sometimes the gamification of everything actually obscures really important questions. So I think about the corporate world, and there's these corporations in our country who they've set up entire business models that are just oriented towards generating profit. And in some cases, don't care that much about how their employees do, except that their employees are productive. Mm-hmm. And so these same companies will promote things like mindfulness, but really it's a utilitarian promotion of it. At the end of the day, they want you to be like a more productive worker. And they know if someone's just like constantly going, they're eventually going to like burn out or whatnot. And so I guess like we've always said on the show, like we have to come back to those first order questions. And there's a certain level of like busyness, or busyness sounds pejorative, but sometimes we think like, and I'm guilty of this, doing enough or doing more means that I'm better off, or I have my place in the world or in the company, as it happens to be. But in the Catholic world, that becomes particularly dangerous because a lot of what God's called us to do is not, or most everything is not outcome driven. And that's especially the case when we think about something like you've already mentioned prayer, but the liturgy itself. So I have conversations with well-meaning Catholics who say, how can we celebrate Mass in such a way that the teenagers come back? Or
in that group that has like a real stable desire, year after year.
Young people, I should say. I don't want to step on any toes. Again, so much of this is driven by good intentions or the right sort of impulses, but I think also about ways that I've seen Mass celebrated where the idea is achieving sort of like a social or political outcome. Like, we're going to intervene in this situation. We'll bring the liturgy along and knock the wall over. We just got to be really careful with that, because heaven, like the bliss of heaven, is really like the great unutilitarian activity.
Yeah.
And so to fall into that trap is really to kind of fall into this sort of consumerist mentality that pulled us away from the Christian life in the first place.
Well, and this is totally plagiarizing Father Protus, who actually, he comes and does Mass for us at Mercy College of Health Sciences. He said it a bit different, but I'm going to make your point. We can sometimes think that our entire life of faith is just a utilitarian thing to get the big pie in the sky and the by and by in heaven.
Yeah.
And this can sound like what we're saying is heaven's not real, or heaven's not better, or that isn't the goal of life with God. It's hard to talk about, but of course, because heaven is so wonderful and the grace of God is so wonderful, but just to be at peace with the will of God in this life is already a foretaste of heaven. And if we act like God is created, how many ever years we have, 1 year to 100, and he's made our entire life just a sort of utilitarian test case, that is a very, frankly, horrifying vision of God. I really do think that this is where prayer and action, contemplation and action come together. If you can have a heart at peace with God's will, you, as it were, drag along heaven with you, at least a foretaste of it, wherever you go. And this is not like New Age stuff. This is what all of the early church fathers said why Jesus Christ became incarnate. To have looked at the Savior's face was to already preview heaven when he walked earth. Mm-hmm. And to look at the Savior's face in the Eucharist is already a preview of heaven. And to be the charity of Jesus Christ for others, but is to sort of be heaven already.
Yeah.
Our lives are not utilitarian like we earn, because that's the other thing. It denies grace. Like, we're going to earn heaven.
Yeah.
We can't earn heaven, but be still and know that I am God. Heaven comes to us.
Well, when we say that, I know there are some listeners, and I've thought this myself, who will think, what, I don't get any reward out of the whole thing? Because if I'm going to dedicate so much time and energy, like, we naturally think, like, what's the payout? But I want to come back to, this is something we touched on in December, but I don't think we fully unpacked it. Think about the greatest things in life. Like, the most important relationship that you have, either your best friend or, if you're married, your spouse. Can you imagine, like, how horrible it would be if, like, you go on a date night with your wife and there's sort of this running meter? It's like the wellness programs at work. Like, oh, we discussed this, like 10 points.
Yeah, we'll keep it very broad. Yes, that's right. Like, what a horrible way to think. Yeah, no, keep going. Sorry.
When you're in love with someone, the greatness of it is being with them, being present with them, and getting to know them truly. There's not a way you could encapsulate that, and with sort of like the metrics that we try to apply to other things in life.
No, I mean, I made sure in prayer, and this again sounds like I'm trying not to brag. It came to me. It is not mine. I was praying, and it became obvious that I was very thankful that we had these snowstorms, because there wasn't anything to do. I mean, yes, I can answer emails and things like this, and certainly did that. But a lot of it was just cooking meals and being with the family, and that's it. And then I thought, oh, wow, here I am thanking God for weather severe enough that it probably killed people. And then I was led to think, oh, Lord, about those people. And my point is, when you start to stop and think about charity, and like you said, think about that grace is just really eternity seeping into a present moment, you will be surprised about where grace will lead you in prayer. And so you don't have to have, like you said, this like great, I have the best 10 prayers of the people ever. If you will stop and let God speak in the silence, Grace will lead your heart to where you need to pray. This is The Uncommon Good. Bo Bonner, Dr. Bud Marr. Stick around. We'll be back right after this. Back with The Uncommon Good. Bo Bonner and Dr. Bud Marr joining you this week. Thank you for listening to the show. It is so wonderful to have you with us. So, Bud, I'd say the first segment didn't surprise you too bad.
No, that was fun. I was nervous, I'll be honest, because I am and when it comes to thinking or presenting, a slow cooker. So I'm really amazed, even like in political debates and things, those folks who, it's like they're not surprised. But I've started this practice that kind of weirds people out, where if someone asks me a question or they pose a thought I wasn't anticipating, I'll actually like mentally count in my mind to 10 before I respond.
Can your new nickname be Crockpot because you're a slow cooker?
That sounds like I'm also maybe a mafia member.
All right, well, we can stew on that one too. No reason to name someone Crockpot immediately. They should let us think on that one.
Real quick, I have to share, since nicknames came up. I had a great friend in college, and he was, well, there was another friend who was a great nickname or giver of nicknames, and so he came up with these names. Like he called this one guy Josh Juice, and
Juice. Oh, right.
Josh was a ginger. He's great at football. It just really worked.
Yeah.
But Nate decided he wanted a nickname for himself. He started to demand that we call him Sled.
Oh, right.
And we're like, Nate, that sounds like you're a gang member. But
Sled.
It came up great. Like one day he had forgotten his card going to the dining hall. And he's like, I don't want to go back to the dorm. So he kind of slipped past the person who was at the entrance or whatever. And she's like, stop that man. Stop that man. She's like, do you know that guy? And my buddy was like, you don't want to mess with Sled. You don't want to mess with Sled. So he name dropped at a perfect time. But sorry, that's taking us far afield.
No, actually, I want to point out that, Bud, your friend group's nicknames are much more acceptable for the radio. And so I tip my hat, because my friend Dennis Kuhnel, who was the great nicknamer, we can't talk about him.
It is a gift. Our daughter Claire, who's 14 now, she's a giver of nicknames. And other children in the household try it, but only Claire's stick.
Only Claire's works. That's amazing. We I know this is far afield, but our nicknames, we had very intentional ones, like Elias, he was Eli.
Yeah.
And then Stella, we're like, it can be Elle or Ellie. But then Elias called her Diddy for some reason. So that stuck. Antonia was Nia. Finian was Finn. And then by the time, I don't know, maybe it's just you get to the fifth kid, but Helena is Goose. Like, I guess Silly Goose and Goosey. And so anyway, the point being is, my favorite is when nicknames sort of just arise out of the atmosphere or something like that.
Well, people listening are probably not going to be impressed on first blush, but some of Claire's, they come out of nowhere, but they stick. So she calls our son Dominic Bubba Zooty. And with our daughter Mary, who's your goddaughter, it's just Mary's plural.
Mary's.
And when she first said it, I was like, that's ridiculous, but she's Mary's.
So yeah, it's just it's like a shamanistic power. So we salute all those people who are nicknamers.
Yep.
So let's get back to the show.
I was kind of paused, like, where could this go? Then I realized we're 3.5 minutes into the second segment, so let's get to it.
Well, so actually, Bud, you've said this before. I'm not a nicknamer, but I am the guy who can usually try to find a connection between one thought to another. So here's my gambit. What nicknamers are good at, preternaturally good at, is what the Greeks called phronesis. So phronesis is a very dorky way to talk about practical wisdom. And practical wisdom is, as it were, a sort of halfway between point between theoretical knowledge. They would call this Sophia if it was high wisdom, or Nous if it was sort of first principles, episteme, which is, things that you would learn through experimentation, things like this. And then that's the high stuff, right? Yeah. And then on the low, on the ground, is techne, which is art, craft, technique. Phronesis, practical wisdom, is how you take knowledge on the ground and you apply it to the more theoretical, or at least, if not theoretical, but ends and goals from which you're going to. And so I want to argue that just as nicknamers have this sort of phronetic capacity to sort of read the room and see what will stick if you throw out a nickname, what we were talking about in the first half of the show, weirdly enough, was about trying to be more frenetic, to have more practical wisdom when we're giving advice as people from the church. So my first question to you in the second segment is, do you see how what we were trying to do, answer that gentleman's email, was about phronesis more than anything, either technical or theoretical?
Well, you have to get to that at some point, because I'm someone who loves the theoretical, so spend a lot of time reading, dinking around with philosophical questions. And philosophy is eminently practical in a certain way, but it's also asking a lot of why questions that if you're living life, what I mean is philosophers, there's always been a gift of philosophy in the sense that like not everyone has the time to get into the weeds of philosophy. And so we've sort of like created institutions that set aside time for people to ask the why questions, but we can't keep ourselves there all of the time. So you have to move to, it's the frenetic that's practical.
Yes.
Yeah,
practical wisdom.
Yeah. And what's great about it is sometimes the frenetic is a entry point to deeper understanding. So like with the questions that you asked in the first segment of the show, just by being posed that sort of directly by a listener, it led to all these things where now you've got the building blocks to really build something great, I think.
And I think that and I love how you put that, because there's also a distinction between the person could have asked techniques. They could have been like, what's the rosary? This is the rosary. How do you do it? Here's the prayers. You do them this way. So you could either go get theoretical questions like, what does the Trinity mean versus how do I pray a rosary? But there's a lot of these, we've talked about this a lot with what we want our radio show to be, medium voice questions. How is it that we mediate between very technical things that are just matters of instruction versus maybe more difficult theoretical things that take an education? So the frenetic. What's interesting though, Bud, so practical wisdom, okay, but can you be practically wise about grace? I don't even know if you have to answer this one, but this is what I want to go to in the second segment that I've been thinking about. Can you be practically wise about grace when grace, by definition, Bud, is a gift freely given? And we repeatedly on our show have pointed out how many times grace is just a curveball. So can you be frenetic about grace? Initial thoughts.
Yeah, this is the first moment on today's show where I feel a little stumped and unprepared to say something that will be constructive or helpful for our listeners. But the one thing I'll say about that, and I touched on this a little bit on last week's episode, I think, but I really believe this deep down. When it comes to grace, there is something mysterious about it. And when we think about the operation of grace in our lives, a lot of times we don't see it until after the fact. So we talked about Augustine's Confessions.
Yep.
He could only narrate his life like he did after he had been through it all. If you try to stop Augustine when he's still mired in Manichaeism or he's not ready to, break off his relationship with his concubine and things, he's not going to recognize, like you could have all of the truths there, but it's not going to come together for him like it does when he writes the Confessions. That being said, I feel like in my own life, it's become important that I sort of throw myself in front of the bus of grace.
Yeah,
and what I mean,
I like that a lot. Keep
what
going.
I mean by that is, so be still, know that I'm God. But there is a way in which, like, I had this kind of lethargy for many years where it's like, well, God's grace will hit me when it does. When there is a way where you sort of, we know from the lives of the saints or from the stories of conversions that certain sort of things can bring about the interruption of grace. And so that's where the techne comes into it, I think. So if someone's like, I don't know, God just seems silent in my life, or I don't feel like grace is really interwoven into my daily events, that's when I'm like, you have to, so to speak, like throw yourself out in traffic, or maybe a less violent metaphor is like, you really have to put yourself in the presence of God. So praying the rosary, there is a way where you could turn it into this kind of rote drudgery. There's also a way where, man, you think about someone great like St. Mother Theresa of Calcutta, and she had many years of dryness when she was serving the poorest of the poor and spending hours in Eucharistic adoration. So there is a way, it's like, it's really anti-Kantian. We don't have time to get to Immanuel Kant's deontology today, but where you say, like, I'm going to do the things that bring about the presence of God into my life, even when I don't have the feeling from the get-go.
Well, and so part of this goes back to what we said in the first segment about gamification. You can gamify the rosary.
Yeah.
A very boring game. That's mean. But certainly I see that happen. Again, but we didn't set this up. You've put it perfectly. Throwing yourself in front of the bus of grace. I would put it this way. Playing Frogger with grace, right? Yeah. You have to get out in the road. So this is what I was thinking of. Last week, we talked about the wise men. And if you remember, I was a little too fascinated because we needed to get done with the show, and I kept droning on, that grace can do whatever it wants. So let me back up and say, God can give grace to the most recalcitrant sinner because, of course, grace is not earned. So it's not what we're saying is you have to like do X, Y, or Z, or like the frequency wave of God's grace can't be picked up. God can graciously intervene and does in everyone's life. But it's interesting that if we look again and again at the patterns both of the saints, both the Old Testament and New Testament saints, and what Jesus says about grace, there is certainly things that you can be practically wise about. So I think about the wise men. On one hand, what was the grace? The grace was the star.
Yep.
They didn't earn it. No, that was completely God reaching, as it were, to the Gentiles for his own purposes, right, bud? To show through providence the theophany was going to be epiphany.
They probably weren't even thinking like, oh, we're looking out for this certain kind of star, which will bring about this certain kind of information. They're doing their astronomical studies on a regular basis.
But that astronomical studies, right, it is a loving attention to God's creation, is a preparation that when the seed of faith came, it had a place to germinate. But that's not all. Once they had that grace intervene in their life, what did they do? They could have ignored it. They could have wrote it down like, weird star on Thursday. What did they do? They set off. And so, but I think that the practically wise part, so to speak, can be sandwiched, as it were, around grace, which we have very little control of. It's not just the wise men. I think about this in terms of the parable of the seeds. We often, like, people will again and again talk about the seeds, and they'll say, like, you need to plant a seed, you need to throw a seed. But actually, no, in that parable, God throws seeds. God throws seeds, to be honest, in a very sort of what seems to us, haphazard manner. The most you can draw from that, bud, is what sort of soil is your soul, so when the seed falls, it can plant. Are you one with thorns? Are you one that's rocky, or is yours good soil, right? So there is preparation that is practically wise that we can get through imitating the saints, through the sort of education that we think of when it comes to something like spiritual theology. We can't say, if you do X, Y amount of grace will come. But we can't, just like a garden, man. Yeah. You can till a garden, you can plant, you can do all you want, but it's not guaranteed that the plants grow. But it's practically wise to do certain things. So I think that that's where the practical wisdom in grace comes. You can prepare, and then grace comes, and then you can react. So that, to me, is there's preparation, but then you have to be receptive, and then you have to react to it.
My wheels are really turning now. I might go a different direction, so pull me in if this is too much of a bunny trail. When you talk about the seed germinating, that to me connects back to what we were saying in the first part of the show about like the non-utilitarian character of so much of the Christian life.
Absolutely.
Including evangelization. So you think about the word culture, what does that connect to? Well, etymologically, it comes from the Latin for to care, or we use the word cultivate. So I think when we start thinking about
cult, right? Like
cultist,
worship.
Yeah, it's all related. When we think about reaching our neighbors, part of it, and again, in saying this out loud, you can't turn this into like an outcome-driven thing either, but a parish has to have a culture, a deep soil. And I feel like in some of our communities here in Des Moines, like, how do I say it? Like ethnic groups that have more recently come to the United States, like they're kind of showing us the way with some of this. So you think about the great celebrations of Our Lady of Guadalupe on the south side, some of our Catholic brethren, they're like, we're just going to get together. We'll worship until midnight. We're going to eat all this different food. There's going to be great music and everything.
Tamales, and they're always great. Yes.
So all of a sudden you have this cultus. It's connected to worship, but there's more there. Yeah, it's about art. It's about coming together. It's about eating at the same table. And that creates the soil where someone who in the community might be nervous about showing up for the Bible study, or I'll be honest, like sometimes I'm nervous showing up to parish events if they're too, again, like sort of like outcomes driven. Like what what paperwork I'm gonna have to sign, or
Right.
what I'm gonna have to sign up for this evening or whatnot. But you kind of create that soil where when the time is right, it can bloom into something really great.
And I think that is something important to point to. We talk about the new evangelization or just evangelization itself, or being a church that's open to speaking to others, to defending our faith. I think people get tripped up. I mean, first of all, there's all sorts of human reasons to get tripped up. Oh, I don't speak well. What if I make the faith look stupid or something like this? But this goes back to Peter saying you have to defend the hope that's in you, but defend is even probably too strong of a word because it makes it sound like you have to win a battle. Folks, if you evangelize your entire life and no one converts from your evangelization, it is still worth it for its own sake. To proclaim the goodness of Jesus Christ, though no one takes you up on it, is worth the entire world. And that, to me, Bud, is what trips us up so much, and why what you were saying about a deep soil. If what you end up practically doing for the Lord's kingdom in this life is just break a lot of dirt clods, you will never know when Christ will send the seeds and the person who will water it, and it will bloom. But we've done this when we talk to our nursing students.
Yeah.
Where we'll say, we're going to relieve a burden from you. You can never save a life. Everyone dies. But you can heal people, and you can heal people on a deathbed. Similarly, you don't save anyone. Bud and I don't save anyone. Clergy don't save anyone. God saves. We evangelize, which just means literally proclaim the good news. And you don't have to do it well, and you don't have to have a high success rate. And funny enough, folks, if we would get to that point where we just begin to love the joy of proclaiming the good news and not worry about the outcomes, but I think that's when the fields blossom.
I think our Lord warned us about all this, or gave us forewarning in the positive sense of the term, where he says, broad is the path that leads to destruction, but narrow is the way that leads to life. And he says, when the Son of Man returns, will he still find faith on the earth? So there are just these reminders that really the gospel message, even though it's good news, won't be heeded by the majority. It's just a matter of fact that for the most part, the seeds of faithfulness are often kind of a remnant or whatnot. And then on the flip side, so many of the parables are about a person who gives up everything for the one lost coin or the one lost sheep. There's this kind of gratuity. They find the pearl of great price and sell the entire field or whatnot. And so there's this way where we hear those parables and we're like, man, it's amazing that Jesus, he had that mindset. That's great. But then we turn around and we basically judge all of our efforts and our activities on the basis of how many butts were in the seat. And again, we always have to qualify that. At the college, we're trying to run a business, and in parishes, it does matter. We pay attention to numbers, but if you, you're saying, if you spend your life basically dragging people into the kingdom, and it happens to be 0 or 1. If it's 1, it's that one lost sheep. If it's 0, I think our Lord will say, well done, good and faithful servant. You were the prophet I sent to give the message, knowing that it wouldn't be unheeded. Because even when Jesus gives the parables, he's like, I give them in this manner so that
not everyone,
so that they don't turn. And that, we could do more with that gospel. But I think just reducing it to how many numbers did it produce? It's a dangerous trap.
Yeah, seek ye first the kingdom of God, and all these things besides will be given unto thee. I mean, that's the numbers, right? If you seek to spread the word just because it's worth doing on its own, you'll be surprised. And that's where I think we can be practically wise, frenetic about grace. Grace will do, it is a wild stallion running around, and we don't know where it's going to end up. But we can prepare. We prepare to receive. And then this, but I think, is the other thing we can do better as parishes, as a church in general. Maybe we can talk about this next show. Once we do the preparation and grace shows up, are we going to react? Are we, and not only ourselves, are we going to give people the paths to move forward now that you got grace, which was not in our control, right? But people show up to the door with grace. Are we going to show them paths for them to react to that grace new in their life? But I will have to argue that whatever providence God used to do this sort of version of the show, I thank him for it. It was sort of a wild whim. You did honorably, my friend, with all of your answers.
Do we have a sound effect with applause? Be careful. No, that's not that.
No. It's still that one. This is the Uncommon Good, Bo Bonner and Dr. Bud Marr. Stick around. We'll be back right after this. Back with the Uncommon Good. Bo Bonner and Dr. Bud Marr joining you this week. Thank you for listening to the show. Thank you for all of our faithful listeners, whether that's live on the radio waves, iowacatholicradio.com, the Iowa Catholic Radio app, or on the podcast. It's wonderful to have you with us. Hey, if you want to email us, I mean, we basically had an entire show, Bud, where people, someone emailed in and sort of sparked the conversation. Yeah. We're very easy to find. You can go to Iowa Catholic. Iowa Catholic Radio, I think, has ways to get in touch. You can email them, and they'll get in touch with us. But certainly, if you look at Mercy College, in fact, we're just too easy to reach. So if you want to email in and maybe have a comment or a question, we're all for it. Again, thank you for the readers who have reached out to us. It's been wonderful to get a chance to react on air to some of the things you said.
You've become kind of our resident mixer. You know, like
Wicca.
Yeah, exactly. Do you have the technological capacity where folks did like an audio recording of their question? You could patch it into the show?
We probably could. It depends on how good their... I mean, we probably could. Yeah,
I've always wanted to do a call-in show.
But I certainly could do that.
That'd be fun.
If you email us, and then we could probably set that up about how to make that work.
Ooh.
But so there you go.
Now
Open
I'm
invitation. You've not been intrigued for years, but now... What do we say? This is year 7?
Yeah.
It's my year 8 here in Iowa. The point being is we're willing and ready to do those things. But we just had a whole show about why prayer is important. Yep. So how about you tell people how they can pray along with us here on Iowa Catholic Radio?
Please do join us in our prayer life. We pray the rosary on air at 10 a.m., 6 a.m. and 10 a.m. I had a brain freeze there. And then the Chaplet of Divine Mercy at 2:55 in the afternoon. You can also use the Iowa Catholic Radio app to pray the rosary anytime, anywhere.
And if you want to check out events happening through the auspices of Iowa Catholic Radio, that makes it sound very royal, so I'll keep it. The auspices of Iowa Catholic Radio. Nice. You can go to iowacatholicradio.com and look at events. Here's a few coming up. February 9th in West Des Moines at 12 o'clock noon at St. Francis of Assisi Church. The Man Up West Power Lunch. Father Nick Smith, parochial vicar at Christ the King in Des Moines, and host of the Daily Gospel Reflection Iowa Catholic Radio, will provide us with ways we can prepare the season for Lent. Lunch provided by Chick-fil-A or bring your own. On February 10th in Ankeny at 5 p.m. at the FFA Enrichment Center, Trivia Night by Candlelight Green Gala. The St. Luke Evangelist Catholic School would like to invite you to participate in their annual Green Gala. You can go check more about that, iowacatholicradio.com. And then finally, in April 12th at Altoona, 6 p.m., St. John and Paul Catholic Church. Peter Herbeck will be at St. John and Paul Church for an inspiring evening where faith and fellowship come alive. Again, you can look at all that on iowacatholicradio.com. Also, of course, iowacatholicradio.com is a ministry that is not just the people on the air, behind the boards, or behind the desks. It is your ministry as well. It is impossible for us to do that without your help, both your volunteer hours, all of your prayers that make this possible, but yes, of course, your material help as well. Please keep us in mind to keep us on air. Keep this ministry expanding by offering your gifts if you're able. You can donate at iowacatholicradio.com, the Iowa Catholic Radio app, or call or text 515-223-1150. We appreciate very much everybody who gives to Iowa Catholic Radio that makes it a possibility. But if we can continue this, we can continue expanding. And radio, Bud, people decided it was going to be dead, and the song thought video would kill the radio star. Maybe the radio stars are mostly dead, but radio itself, still good and living. And it is that constant background waiting for someone to come in their time of need to hear the voice of the Lord. Bud and I are very appreciative to be a part of this ministry, and we thank you for your support.
When you were talking about video killed the radio star, but not successfully, I was thinking about the, I'm not a big professional wrestling fan, but you know The Undertaker, where he's...
Yeah, that's...
We got to do one of those memes but we'll label him radio.
I like that. Okay, we'll get on that one. This is the Uncommon Good. May Jesus Christ, the Prince of Peace, reign in our hearts, family, city, state, nation, solar system, galaxy, the whole kit and caboodle. This is the Uncommon Good, and we'll be back next week.
The Uncommon Good with Bo Bonner and Dr. Bud Marr is heard every week on wonderful Catholic stations like this one. and anytime on podcast. Just search for The Uncommon Good.
Support for Iowa Catholic Radio and The Uncommon Good provided by Mercy College of Health Sciences. Learn more at mchs.edu.